This evening, our primary concern will be a consideration of the solar system as it has descended to us in the spiritual traditions of the great religions and philosophies of the world. The solar system has always been, at least partly, comprehensible. Peoples of different times have interpreted the mystery of it according to their own degree of insight. But certain astronomical phenomena were discovered at a comparatively early date. And while it was not until a few hundred years ago that our present astronomical pattern came into general acceptance, there is no doubt that ancient man intuited a great deal of what we call the modern science of astronomy. He probably could not pass a test according to our present standards, but he may also have possessed what modern astronomers do not have, and that is the inward experience of a living universe. To most modern people, even though they may actually deny the literalness of the statement, to most of them, the solar system in which we live is at best only an environment. It is a place larger than the back 40 acres of 19th century agriculturists, but still a place. It was merely an area in which things could happen, and whatever things were likely to happen were associated with planets, luminaries, asteroids perhaps, meteors, and finally the sovereign leadership of the sun. The solar system was a wonderful, magnificent kind of machine. Where it came from, we could abstractly speculate. That it must ultimately be dissolved in some final combustion, we can also assume. There is also a parallel line of thought in which it is going to become colder and colder until it becomes impossible to exist within it. All these rather melancholy concepts, however, are separated from our present thought by countless millennia yet to come. These things are for the remote future. The solar system as we see it is therefore our house. And from a very early time, men began to think of it as a temple, a tabernacle, a shrine. Pythagoras referred to the sun as a flaming altar around which the chariots of the gods were driven in their orbits, what we would call planets. The early church was not so very different in its speculations on these matters. At some comparatively ancient time, man also sensed that there was more to planets than he had first imagined. The belief that they were some kind of deities he held even anciently. They were sparks of light in the sky, and observations from the great astronomical towers or ziggurats on the plains of Babylon reveal that planets moved more rapidly than stars. So to them was given the term the wanderers. They moved in some remarkable procession around the sovereignty of the sun. This was not entirely understood, but they did move, and they had orbits. And even several thousand years ago, men calculated these orbits with some accuracy. Probably at first the most practical purpose was divination. Astrology, sometimes called the mad mother of astronomy, had come into being. Almost equally useful was the development of an accurate calendar. Men liked to know how to record the seasons and time, and finally durations of ages. Not only was the calendar highly advanced in Asia and the Mediterranean area, but it was well advanced on the Western Hemisphere, especially in Central America. When the Spaniards came here, they corrected their own calendar from the calendar of the Maya. Thus, astronomy was always a more or less sacred science. It was part of the priestly prerogative, and all priests were supposed to know about the motions of the stars and to be able to predict the changes of seasons, and in Egypt, the inundations of the Nile. The solar system also began to intrigue another type of thinker, the analogist. And nearly all ancient science was analogical. The scientists sought to establish parallels between simple things easily known and more difficult things which are hard to understand. And he began to think of the solar system as a living body. He began to think of it as some kind of an organic structure, and he sought to find parallels in the physical body of man, some way of creating a key to the interpretation of universals from man, or perhaps a key to understanding man from a study of universals. This particular aspect was rather highly advanced by the old Kabbalists, and their findings descended as part of the heritage of early Christian mysticism. The Kabbalists, we may say, devised the concept that the solar system was a great person, a macrocosmic being, and that this great person, who was called Macroprosophus, was an organic living thing, that the planets represented the organs within the living body of this power. The sun was the heart. This body was also composed of flesh and of bones. Not only were these flesh and bones taken from the physical structures of planets, the rock was bone, the flesh was herbage and vegetation. But it was also believed that an arterial circulation existed within the body of this greater being. Energy moved in courses like great streams descending from the sun. Energy did not simply dissipate itself in an infinite diffusion. It was actually distributed by some kind of a mysterious arterial or venous system. And in order to provide some kind of an attenuated substance in which this energy might flow without being dissipated, our ancient brethren developed the concept of ether as an invisible element, as a hypothetical medium by means of which forces and energies otherwise irreconcilable could be brought together in a common state or condition. To the alchemists, the solar system was a kind of tree which grew up, and the planets became the symbols of the sacred metals and the various chemicals used in the preparation of the wise man's stone. The planets were also elements of a great theory of medicine in China. In India also, the planets and their orbits provided the key for music and the musical modes. And nearly all Chinese and other Oriental instruments are arranged according to a concept of planetary interrelationships. Pythagoras had the same concept when he broke the monochord, or the single string with frets, and arranged these frets according to the old concept of the planetary orbits. In all, the solar system became a kind of general source of analogical knowledge. Today we are inclined to think that this is all more or less a superstition. We are loath to admit that we might be living within a vast cellular organism. But the more we study cells and molecules and atoms and electrons and ions, the more it becomes evident that there are analogies between the solar system and the minute structures which make up the mass of matter as we know it today. We are also becoming more aware of the fact that there is no such a thing as any inert substance. Everything is living material, made up of life, and therefore it would hardly be proper to think of the solar system anymore as dead. It would be better to think of it as a vast area of life, perhaps an area of seminal life, that is, life in the form of seed life, which could, under certain conditions, unfold its own potential, and from each seed might spring another solar system in the course of infinite ages. The Hindus, of course, did not like to think of a solar system wandering around lonely in space, so the Hindu proceeded to populate space with an innumerable family of such solar systems. They might differ in detail, they might vary in size, but they were a kind of creation, just as man is a kind of creation. And as this type of creation may have many subtypes, so in the solar system pattern, there could be many different solar systems. And as the sun ruled in sovereignty over its planets, so it was assumed that a certain number of solar systems formed also a pattern, and that in the midst of these was a larger or universal sun, around which many solar systems moved. These solar systems, moving around this sovereign sun, also constituted units. Therefore, a cosmic system was merely a larger type of cell with suns taking the place of planets, and each sun surrounded by its own worlds. All these universal systems also grouped around greater centers, which might be likened to cosmic suns. And these also, in their endless movements in space, arranged themselves in vast patterns around still more remote centers of life and energy, until the universe and all that it contained and the vast field of space and all that it sustained went on and on forever, always full of life, this life always patterned and orderly and proceeding and progressing according to some mysterious law beyond human comprehension. Thus the universe was populated with a race of giants. Space was inhabited by gods over gods. And all these mysterious sparks in the sky were far more than merely simply radiant centers of some magnetic energy or something of that nature. They were alive, and they shone because the life in them shone through. Perhaps we would interpret this life merely as a fierce combustion, but to these peoples this life was a proof of a great power, a great force. And the light of suns was nothing but the visible nimbus around the heads of invisible gods. All this made quite a fine and wonderful and dramatic way of looking at things. In the Buddhist sutra, the Lotus of the True Law, another kind of solar mystery is introduced. Here the great planetary bodies and even the great cosmic suns in the galaxies of the Milky Way, or perhaps compounded into the mysterious forms of the zodiacal constellations, all these great sparks of light in the sky were actually temples, shrines, pagodas, mysterious places of worship for great spiritual beings. Every light in the sky was a Buddha in meditation upon the infinite. And when somewhere in the great field of space another living creature, being, or power attained the infinite illumination, all these mysterious altars and shrines and pagodas in the sky winked and twinkled with approval, and their mysterious powers extending out as spiritual energies became aware of the great cosmic benefaction that this change had wrought when another soul found eternal light. So all these different symbols become quite poetic and, in many regards and ways, quite inspiring in the development of poetic theory, in the development of religious mystery. All of these different elements go into the general situation and pageantry of things. In the study of this same problem, we then pass on to other considerations. From Paracelsus we learn, for example, that it was the belief of the enlightened of old that every solar system is fashioned in a way like an egg. The Hindus also had the mysterious egg, which was identical with the womb of Meru. In the solar system, there are actually three centers of power, three suns, from which in the subconsciousness of man came the concept of the Trinity, or the threefold power of God, which was based upon the ancient identification of the Son with deity, an identification that is to be found in every part of the world and in almost every level of human society. Even the most primitive people have been overwhelmed by the majesty of the sun, and have come nearly always to attribute the solar propensities to their principal deities. In the Paracelsian corpus, for example, the three suns represent a spiritual center, which radiates the light of God, a psychic center, which radiates the light of love, or of the second logos, and a material center, from which is generated the physical structure of the solar system itself. Thus it was believed in those days that the visible sun was not the source of life or light. And while it seems to be in a state of vast combustion, as suggested during eclipses when we can see the corona in the form of vast outburstings of flame, rising perhaps thousands of miles into space. But to the ancients, this sun, this luminous disk, was actually a reflector of light, not a source of it. Some say, as the Druids did, that it was like the reflecting or refracting lens that brought energy to a focal point, bestowing upon it the power to burn by bringing or converging the rays of light into a small area. In any event, they believed definitely that the true source of all life was in the spiritual sun, invisible, because its life is not such that men can perceive it with any sensory structure which they possess. This spiritual sun imparts its glory to the psychic or soul center of the solar system, which may be likened to the second logos, or the second person of the Neoplatonic Trinity. This second logos, or power, in turn transfers its energy or life to the third or material structure, which is therefore ensouled by two invisible sources of life. In ancient symbolism, sometimes these three suns were represented as concentric circles, one within the other, or concentric spheres. Under such condition, each of the three moved on a different inclination of axis, and the result was that the complete compound solar body was gyroscopic, capable of suspending itself in the midst of its creation simply by the mysterious equilibrium of the intermotions of its own nature or substance. This concept almost certainly was involved in the Trimurti, or the three-headed Brahma in India, and probably in the three persons of the triad in Christianity. They did represent in the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost the three transcendent powers which are together said to be the source of all light or all life in the solar system. Now, we have many ways in which we seek to understand the structure of a solar system. Astronomy has its own ideas, and these ideas may be physically correct, and yet in no way exhaust the entire mystery of the matter. The ancients were inclined to feel that a solar system was an allotment in place. That is, somewhere in the great field of life, a solar system had a right to exist, had a right to a place in which it could grow, in which it could extend its powers, fulfill its maturity. In other words, like the optimistic human being, the solar system more or less liked to believe that it had a home, a little part of this great space in which all things exist. And like man, the solar system perhaps has only one allotment, the small square of earth in which it will be buried. But in any event, there was this space allotment. And in this space allotment, when the time came, the third Logos, or the third creating power, called by the Gnostics Ildaboath, the Lord of the Aeons, was entrusted with the power to bring forth a material world. We know, for example, in the legend of the building of Solomon's temple, that three powers, three master builders, were united in this task. Solomon, king of Israel, Hiram, king of Tyre, and a cunning workman who was brought from Tyre by King Hiram to be the overseer and master of the works, and who was to be the master builder in the perfection of the house of Solomon the king. These three, later called the three grand masters of Jerusalem, were therefore likened to the three sons in the Kabbalistic mystery. Solomon symbolizing the spiritual sun, Hiram of Tyre the psychic sun, which furnished the materials for the temple, and finally Hiram the son of the widow, the master builder, who was the one to fashion the outer fabric of the house of the living God. So the third Logos, or creating physical power, invested with authority by the invisible powers behind it, began to make use, as Bamy expresses it, of the allotment, and did so by first of all building around the circumference of the allotment in space the mysterious wall pass not, which was the measuring, the surveying of the allotment. William Blake therefore shows deity in the beginning of creation, holding the architect's compass in his hand and drawing a great circle. This great circle became in symbolism the mysterious symbol of the sun itself, a dot in a circle, sometimes represented by the eye of Horus, or an open eye in a circle. But whatever we may want to call it, the first great movement was this tracing of the circle by the compass in the hand of the infinite. And into this allotment set aside by the tracing of the circle, it was said that the great powers began to fashion, as within the circular globe of an alchemical vessel, the mystery of the solar system. The solar system, as Plato also points out, begins therefore with the circumference and moves gradually toward the center. The wall of the solar system was what the ancient Kabbalists and mystics in the valley of the Euphrates referred to as the wall of heaven. And we find this same thought restored to us in the Apocalypse of St. John and in Muhammad's mysterious night journey to heaven. Also the story of this star descending through the 7 gates of the 7 worlds in the Babylonian theology. And the first and most mysterious power, therefore, of this wall, as St. John points out, is that it divides the universe into, or the solar system more correctly now, into 2 parts. And this division is suggested in the opening chapters of Genesis, when the waters which were above the heavens were divided from the waters which were beneath the heavens. Outside of the great ring, Ptolemy and the other map makers and geographers of old time assumed there to be only the spiritual universe. This spiritual universe was the abode of the heavenly hosts. Here, somewhere in space, was the eternal throne of God. Here the elders knelt before the throne, and here the Lamb stood as the eternal sacrifice to a world of relapsed lives. St. John, therefore, describes the little ladder that leads up to the wall of heaven, the door that goes through the firmament into that which is above and beyond. Outside of the ring that was set up in the allotment of space, the heavens themselves were therefore vastly diversified into 3 great rings, which were called the rings of the constellations. 12 of these constellations formed the zodiacal band and girdled the globe, which was to be the solar system. 12 other constellations were gathered to the north to form the stars of the northern hemisphere, and 12 others to the south, forming the constellations of the southern hemisphere. These 36 constellations, 12 in the middle boundaries, 12 to the north and 12 to the south, made up the 36 decans or divisions of the zodiac in the philosophy of Babylon. This great zodiacal band, therefore, was really the symbol of the sovereign government of that which was above and beyond the solar system. Here the great gods sat in endless meditation upon this little bubble and all it contained. Here were the Rishi, the eternal sages, gathering to protect the mysterious power of the magnetic pole. Here was the dragon which Jason sought when he went forth in quest of the magic fleece, the golden fleece. Here also were all the fields of mythology and all the great, strange, and incredible legendary that arose not really from the study of star groups, but from ancient concepts concerning the divine world that rested beyond the boundary of the solar system. Within this solar system itself, this allotment, this area, began to constrict from the circumference to the center. As it constricted, it left behind it 7 conditions of privation, which became to the ancients orbits, or symbols of the pathways of planets. The first and most ancient being or god that was sensed to have been created by this procedure was the deity who ruled over the final extremities of solar existence. This was Cronus, ancient Saturn. He was the first of the gods, the first differentiation within the solar system. As the first to come into being, he would be the last to go. And also, in the process of the disintegration of worlds, he would devour all else that came from himself, as Saturn or Cronus is said to have devoured his children. Within the orbit of Cronus was that of Jupiter. For Jupiter overcame his own father and took over the rulership of the solar system. And Jupiter, therefore, became the emblem no longer of despotism, but of a constitutional authority. And in the descent of these orbits, if we want to study it closely enough, we will find also the emergence of all forms of government, because each of these planetary powers ruled at one time in the dawn of things by its own arrangement. There is a chart in England, an old engraving, showing the solar system of legislation, and it is a very interesting diagram. As Saturn was a strange kind of melancholy despot, ruling by the divine right, so we find in the empire of Cronus this absolute fatality, this complete despotism. But with the coming of the empire of Jupiter, who took away the despotism of his father, we find the appearance, as in the Greek and Roman legendary, of a kindlier and more benevolent administration. Jupiter was a monarch, but not a despot. Jupiter ruled not merely for his own pleasure, but for the benefit of the governed. He became the symbol of justice, whereas Saturn, that had preceded him, was the symbol not of justice, but of tyranny. And gradually in that age, it is said, Jupiter brought forth order, and society was established upon the great foundations of a benevolent leadership. But in the course of